What's cooking for Putin and Prigozhin? What's next on the menu for Wagner and Russia and Ukraine? Hi folks, welcome to my channel. I'm Baran Kayola. And as you might have suspected, I'll be discussing the recent Wagner Mutiny in Russia. Imagine British chef extraordinaire Gordon Ramsay running his TV show MasterChef, as well as his chain of restaurants, Hell's Kitchen, during the day, and then running a bunch of mercenaries at night. And then one day, waking up and deciding he's going to go overthrow the government of Prime Minister Rishi Sunak or President Joe Biden. And that's exactly what happened with Yevgeni Prigozhin, the owner of Wagner private military contractor, who led a mutiny against the Russian regime. The events ended as quickly as they started, with Prigozhin and Wagner forces that took part in the mutiny being offered amnesty, as well as safe passage to the country of Belarus. Meanwhile, Wagner forces that did not take part in the mutiny will allegedly be offered contracts with the Russian Defense Ministry. So all that begins well, ends well, right? No. To appreciate the gravity of what happened, let's take a quick look at Yevgeny Prigozhin, his background. Where does he come from? What has he done? And what does he want? Originally a small-time criminal in the old Soviet days, Prigozhin came to prominence in the city of St. Petersburg. He ran a restaurant there and became very famous, which put him into touch with the city's vice mayor, a man who eventually became the top spy chief of Russia, and then its prime minister, and then its president. We know him by the name of Vladimir Vladimirovich Putin. Now, if you can run a restaurant and catering business successfully and keep Russian oligarchs happy, you can be sure that you're going to go places. And that's what happened to Prigozhin. He found himself being able to run even more complex operations. That was how Wagner PMC came into existence. The Russian system needed someone who could run some of their international interventions with plausible deniability while getting results, but also turning in a profit. Now, Prigozhin had come to the attention of international media outlets in the mid-2010s by Wagner's intervention in the Syrian civil war on the throes of Putin's intervention in Syria. Of course, not that every aspect of Wagner's presence in Syria had turned out well for Prigozhin or the private military group. Composed and led by retired Russian military and security services personnel, Wagner proved its merit in Syria, but also in African locations such as Mali, the Central African Republic, and Libya. We saw Wagner playing a prominent role in the Russian invasion of Ukraine. Another Prigozhin-affiliated organization, the Internet Research Agency, was a part of the Russian intervention in the U.S. elections in 2016. In short, we're looking at an important wheeler-dealer in the Putin system. So having established one of our primary players in this story, let's take a look at what the mutiny was, what it means in the immediate run. Хорошо, хорошо, Putin not run this show, as the Slovenian artist Klemen Slakonia would say. The Wagner Mutiny laid bare the inherent weaknesses of the Russian system and President Vladimir Putin, especially their war against Ukraine. Now, when we look at Putin, some of us may see a Russian Jack Ryan or James Bond, suave, who knows his moves, knows what he's doing, very self-confident, very patriotic, very able, knows stuff and gets things done, right? No. In fact, the Wagner Mutiny really laid bare the truth that when we look at Putin, we're looking at a man who is aging, getting weaker, getting less competent, becoming more paranoid, and with less time and resources at his disposal. The fact that we're discussing Wagner and the words mutiny, insurrection, what have you, and Putin in the same sentence is because of the Putin regime's incompetence and inability to wage the war in Ukraine successfully and bring it to an end. In the latter parts of 2022, the Putin regime had asked for Wagner's help in sifting through the mess in Ukraine. As a result, Wagner and its leadership had turned to Russia's prison system, recruited literally tens of thousands of convicts on contracts, promising them amnesty on their sentences if they would fight in Ukraine for 6 months. Wagner got its contract troops out of Russia's prisons, many of them out of Russia's prisons, and then put them to use as cannon fodder in the assault on the city of Bakhmut in eastern Ukraine. Wagner and the Russian military captured most of Bakhmut by June 2023, but at great cost. Some experts think that the Russians may have lost as many as between 50,000 and 100,000 troops just to capture Bakhmut, a city of no particular strategic importance. Prigozhin blamed the bloodbath in Bakhmut on Russian Defense Minister Sergei Shoigu and Chief of General Staff Valery Gerasimov. Prigozhin accused them of not supporting Wagner forces adequately with supplies, with ammunition, with air support, with artillery support. In a video that came out in May 2023, Prigozhin stood in front of a group of dead Wagner troopers and used expletives against Shoigu and Gerasimov and asked them to resign. So the ostensible reason for the mutiny on June 23rd, 24th was Prigozhin's desire to have Shoigu and Gerasimov removed from power. So on June 23rd, Prigozhin started claiming that the Russian military had bombed the Wagner forces, and so he started this mutiny to force Putin's hand in removing Shoigu and Gerasimov from office. Putin convinced Prigozhin to stop his mutiny upon allegedly promising that Shoigu and Gerasimov would be removed from office. As of the shooting of this video, however, both men are still at their jobs. So what happens next? What are the long-term implications of the Wagner mutiny for Russia as well as the war in Ukraine? At this point, it's hard to tell, but for Prigozhin and Wagner to organize a mutiny on the drop of a dime and then take out a major city in southern Russia, and then march north towards the Russian capital with such ease without really being stopped by the police or the armed forces, possibly coming within 200 kilometers of Moscow, is really bad news for Russia and Putin. As I paraphrased Mr. Klemen Slakonia earlier, "Хорошо, хорошо. Putin not run this freaking show." In Russia, the cracks within the Putin system can no longer be papered over by exiles or promises of amnesty or throwing money at problems. The problems, corruption, deterioration of the rule of law, absence of democracy, absence of freedoms, all of that is only going to get worse. Other oligarchs, other kleptocrats, other security cracks, the so-called Siloviki, and all sorts of rats are going to come out of the woodwork for their own pound of flesh, or possibly tons and tons of the flesh. And Putin is going to have to play kindergarten cop to this mess of characters, minus, of course, Arnold's charm and the beauty of the child actors in that movie. For Ukraine, the Wagner mutiny is both bad news and good news. It's bad news because the Russian side, in order to compensate for its very apparent weaknesses, is probably going to expand its bombing and artillery campaign against Ukrainian forces and against Ukrainian civilians. But it's also good news because the mutiny has, as I mentioned, laid bare the very serious weaknesses of the Putin regime and of Russia. For the Ukrainian forces to see how weak their opponents are, this is going to give them additional morale, additional strength to move on. In the field, the Ukrainian forces are going to push harder. In the rear, Ukrainian civilians are going to become even more resilient, knowing how weak the opposition is. Ultimately, the Wagner mutiny means that the probability of Ukrainians expelling the Russians from their country has gone up. So that's it for me. What do you think? How do you think the mutiny will affect events within Russia and the war in Ukraine? Write in the comments below. And if something isn't clear, write that as a comment as well. Either I or one of the viewers will be able to answer you. And if you like this video, please click the like and subscribe buttons so that I can continue making more videos like this one and grow my channel. All right, thanks for watching, folks. I'll see you soon.